Hi, I'm Christopher and welcome to the Cabin Boy Knits Woolcast. In this episode, we'll be dyeing with Weld and we'll be talking about Vestal Virgins, Robin Hood, and woolly dogs. So grab your favorite drink, sit back, and I'll tell you my story. Let's go. Hey, how you doing? Last weekend I was in Toronto for a trunk show, and I'm very rarely in Toronto on weekends, but it was at Passion Knit, and that was on Saturday, and then Sunday was the One of a Kind show, and my son was down that weekend as well. And so he said that he wanted to go, which was fantastic. So I took him up on that offer, and we went. And thank you, Catherine Fan, for providing me with tickets to get in to see the show. I appreciate that. So the One of a Kind show in Toronto has vendors or artisans from all over Canada. I think a few from the States as well. And there's hundreds and hundreds of vendors, and it's a curated show. It's tough to get in, depending on the category. But they have everything from clothing to art and wood carvings and all kinds of stuff. So it's really interesting. And the artisans are phenomenal. So I've been buying stuff. I've been going there for a number of years and picking up great things. And it's a great time as well as we enter the holiday season. So when I got there, I took my son over to talk to Catherine Fan. Catherine is someone I've talked about in prior episodes. She's a phenomenal designer from Toronto in knitwear. I had a chat with her and I asked her, what booths would you recommend? Which ones do you like? And she said, well, I know you're going to like a couple. Definitely here. And one of them, there is a woman who is spinning her dog hair, and you have to check that out. And so absolutely, that's definitely something that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in it because Canada has a long history of working with dog hair in fiber. And long before the Europeans showed up on the shores, if we go to the West Coast and look at the Salish people, they had a history of using dog hair in their weaving. In fact, they had a dog that was bred specifically for wool or for weaving, and it was called the woolly dog. And the dog looked halfway between a Pomeranian and a Samoyed, and so that's the way it's been described in history books anyway. And so what they would do with this dog is they would shear it just like a lamb. And they kept the dogs separate from their hunting dogs. And in fact, on the coast, some of the dogs would be kept on island, so they're completely separate from the other dogs so that there wouldn't be any interbreeding. But also the woolly dogs would be kept in the house. In some households, they'd be given names. They'd even be buried beside family members. So it was a very important part of the Salish life, and the woolly dogs performed an important piece of that. And so what they would do is they would take the hair from the dog, and then they would mix it with mountain goat hair, and they'd make blankets and garments and whatnot. So there are still a few blankets floating around in various museums. It's definitely on my bucket list to find one, and I think I've got a lead on a couple that I want to check out and see, but I'm excited about that. So I'm excited. I was really happy to know that there was somebody that was going to be using dog hair. Just a couple more things on the woolly dog. So it doesn't exist anymore. It became extinct. And what happened was the Europeans, as they arrived, they brought their sheep. And so there really wasn't a demand for hair from the woolly dog anymore. And so they stopped because it wasn't needed, because they had sheep here. They left it to interbreed with other dogs, and now the woolly dog is extinct. So very happy to happen upon the vendor, which is Poppy's Pom Pom. And so I showed up. The owner wasn't there, unfortunately, but I did get my hand on these 2 skeins of yarn, and they are so soft, softer than any wool that I've felt. It has a different consistency to it. It's airy and incredibly soft. So I can't wait to dye with this. Actually, the owner contacted me that night and said, sorry I missed you, and so we exchanged notes, and we're going to have a dye date, and so we'll be dyeing some of this yarn, but it feels incredible. I can't wait to knit with it. Can't wait to dye it as well. So then I'm walking along and happened upon a couple of more yarn. I think there was probably around 4 booths that had yarn, and one of them really caught my eye, and it's this yarn, and this is from Creative Lane, and it's a Creative Lane, and I believe the dyer is from around Laval, Quebec, and the colors are absolutely spectacular. So I started looking at the yarn. I was really excited about the colors, and I noticed that she had a sign up that said natural dye. And so I asked her, I said, well, which ones are natural dye? And because none of the yarn looks like natural dyed yarn. And she said all of it. And so I thought there was a miscommunication between French and English, and no, all of it is naturally dyed, and it's just incredible. She's using Blue-Faced Leicester, which I use a lot of, and I think there's merino in here as well, and this one has some nylon in it. It's a sock yarn, but the colors are spectacular. And the dyer she's from Laval, Quebec, but she went to school at Concordia University in Montreal and studied chemistry. And so she really has a fantastic, eye and understanding of natural dye, and the colors that she's pulling are incredible. And why I got so excited about this is I love when I see it's either natural dye or acid-based dyes where they're doing some great things with the yarn, and it really pushes me as a dyer. And it really inspires me as well. So I was so happy to see this. So we chatted for a little bit. She gave me some great stitch markers. They're really nice and appropriate as well. So I was really happy with that. And the kicker on all this was, so as we start talking, started talking yarn stores and whatnot, and her yarn is available on Etsy. So I will put a link to her yarn, so please check it out. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic yarn. So we started chatting and started chatting about yarn shops, and she said she's going to be in a yarn shop at the end of, or in the new year. And I said, so am I. And so we started chatting about it, and it's the same store. It's Crocheting Company. So it was quite funny. So it's a small world, but I was so excited about this yarn. It really, really, truly inspires me. I've been doing a lot of dyeing as well lately, and yellow is something that is plentiful around here. So you can dye pretty much anything and it turns yellow. And so I haven't really been dyeing with Weld. And Weld comes from Eurasia, and then it was an introduced species in North America. But Weld has a long history. It goes back into the first millennium BC. And you can find it in record books when you look at the The garments that were worn, for example, the Vestal Virgins in Roman times, their garments were dyed with weld. And even, we fast forward to the 13th century in England and Robin Hood, we think of him wearing green. And so when we look at weld, weld is yellow, usually comes out as a yellow color, beautiful yellow. But in England, the woad was plentiful. What woad gave you blue. And so by over-dyeing your woad dye with weld, you would get a green color. And so Robin Hood and his merry men were wearing a combination of weld and woad. And so the combination of the color of weld and woad is called Lincoln Green, and that's named after a town in England. So I was interested in I see it in the fields. It doesn't really need, it grows in areas that don't need great soil, and they grow about 5 feet tall and flower in June. There's yellow flowers, and then you probably can harvest it around July. And so when you harvest the plant, you want to get the flowers and the leaves, because that's where all the color is. And if you dye it right away, similar to goldenrod, if you dye it right away, you're going to get a very vibrant yellow color. And if you let it dye, you're still going to get a great yellow color, but it will be not as vibrant. It'll be a different yellow, but it's still beautiful. And so when you dye the plant, what you want to do is you want to take the flowers and the leaves off and discard the stem. The stem doesn't really have any color in it. And I'm going to do a whole session on weld, because there's so many variables that impact the color when you're dyeing with weld. The pH level is huge when you're dyeing with weld. So it's a very interesting plant to dye with, and I'm becoming even more interested in dyeing with weld. So I'll do a session on that. But I wanted to share it with you. So this is what weld looks like generally. And the nice thing about weld is, so this is dried weld. And what I can do is I can make a dye pot out of this, and then strain it and put my yarn in to dye and take it out. One thing I've noticed is that the first lot that goes in really sucks up the color, and so when you put your second one in, it's going to be significantly lighter. So that's not a good thing. But what is a good thing is that when I take this out, this has already been through one dye pot. So I took out, I strained it, dried it, and I can use this again, and I can use it for 2 or 3 times. So that's terrific. So I'm looking forward to dyeing more with weld. I did want to show you one of the skeins that I've been dyeing. So this one has almost a tweed color to it, or tone to it. And that's because I was dyeing weld over gray. And remember, when you're dyeing yarn, you can use white yarn. It doesn't have to be white though. You can use gray, brown, and anything you want. I find that when I dye with gray yarns, it brings this earthy tone to it, or tweedish tone to it, and I really like it. So I'll be doing a lot more dyeing with weld. This week I was also in Boston, and I got snowed in. I actually flew in during a snowstorm, which not the smartest thing to do, especially when you're leaving from a little airport in Toronto. Anyway, I got there and for a series of meetings, and then on my way back, the snow kept coming down, and my flight was canceled. So I had some spare time. I was trying to, find a flight on the way home. Managed to get one, but I did have some time, and I knew it was going to be crazy at the airport. So on my way to the airport, I checked out which yarn shops were on my way, and noticed that Newbury Yarns had moved from Newbury Street in Boston to another location in the financial district. So I went over there to check out their yarn and grab some yarn for the airport. And I've been working on a pattern. I started it when I was at the Twist retreat a couple of weeks ago. And so the pattern inspired, or the inspiration for the pattern came from some paintings from A.Y. Jackson, who is a famous Canadian artist who used to live about 2 hours north of here in my favorite part of the world, Algonquin Park. And so the trees that he painted kind of remind me of the assembler. I wanted to reflect it. I was also doing a lot of mosaic knitting over the past summer and teaching as well. And so one of the books I was looking at was Barbara Walker, and she has a huge book on mosaic knitting, and she had one that looks similar to this. So I was looking at that, and it reminded me of the trees in Algonquin Park as well. So I removed the clutter from the pattern and tweaked the tree a little bit, and I've incorporated it in this cowl. Unfortunately, I didn't have the right needle size when I was at the airport because I hadn't planned on taking this on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip this out, reuse the yarn again. I'm going to go down a needle size. Also, I will go down another half size for the ribbing, but this will be a cowl, and this should be ready in a couple weeks. But when I went in to buy the yarn, I wasn't buying just a ball of yarn. I was really excited about this ball of yarn in particular, because in this ball of yarn I have, and it's Dovestone yarn. So in this ball of yarn there is Blueface Leicester, and there's Wensley Dale, and Masham. And I've been using a lot of Blueface Leicester yarn over, especially this year, for dyeing, because I like the way it picks up color. It's a great yarn to buy. Blueface Leicester yarn was heavily influenced by Robert Bakewell, and I've talked about Robert Bakewell in earlier episodes. And Robert Bakewell was lived in England, and he was tweaking with certain breeds of horses and livestock and sheep. And so what he wanted to do was bring out the best qualities, or breed the best qualities out of certain animals. And so Blueface Leicester was the product of that. And this was in the 18th century in England. It wasn't until 1970 that Blueface Leicesters came over to Canada. And they came over primarily for meat. But then people started to recognize the fantastic qualities within the coat. So Blueface Leicester has become more popular in the knitting world and the spinning world especially. And then there's Wensley Dale in this, and Wensley Dale is also from England. And Wensley Dale is related to Blueface Leicester, which is interesting. They've got very similar qualities. And Wensley Dale is also on the endangered list. So it's a heritage breed that I was happy to be able to support. And the Masham is a newer breed, but also from England. And it's a Teeswater and Swandale mix. And so it was great. So when you pick up a ball of yarn, make sure you look at what it is. Is it 100% wool, and what is that wool? Where does it come from? And so this was a piece of history when you think about it, and the type of, or the breed of sheep that are in it. So I was really happy and excited to get this, and it feels great too. It feels fantastic. So I'll put a link to this yarn, so you'll know what the brand is and where to find it. But anyway, so I'm happy with this cowl. I'll be happier when I strip it out and redo it again. I know a lot of people don't like ribbing or ripping out their yarn, but I always look at it as practice, so it doesn't really bother me that much. So I've had a couple of busy weeks, and I will be slowing down now between now and the end of the year. I think I have one more gig, and that is in 2 weeks. I'm going to be at the Toronto Knitters Guild, and I will be talking again on the history of knitting in Canada, which I'm really looking forward to. Because as I say, there's so much to talk about, and I go down different roads each time I give this presentation. So they're all different. So I'll be looking forward to that. And I'm going to have a trunk show there as well. So that will be fun. And then I'm taking a break until the new year. And by taking a break, I mean I will be doing tons of knitting and tons of dyeing. So I hope everyone is having a great December. We have lots of snow here, and I'm so happy about that. I love going out in my snowshoes and checking out animal tracks, and so I hope the snow stays. I've got my fingers crossed. Just wanted to thank again the people who are providing comments, and it's either through Instagram or on YouTube. hope I'm answering all your questions. I'm trying to answer them as quickly as possible and as well thought out as possible as well. So keep them coming. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.